Welcome to Meteorology Matters. So, um, yesterday was quite a day, wasn't it?
It was Earth Day, the 55th anniversary.
Yeah, 55 years. It's amazing to think back to 1970. 20 million Americans out demonstrating.
Right. And this was before the big environmental protections we kind of take for granted now.
Exactly. No Environmental Protection Agency, no Clean Air Act, no Clean Water Act, not in the way we know them.
And that massive public movement, that first Earth Day, it actually led directly to the EPA being created later that very year.
It really shows the power of collective voice, I think, which kind of sets the stage for what we want to talk about today on Meteorology Matters.
Right. Looking at the current environmental policy landscape, specifically under the Trump administration.
Yeah, and contrasting it with those original Earth Day principles and, well, the direction things have been heading for decades, it's quite a shift.
It is. The focus seems very much on energy production now, perhaps, over those protections.
Let's dig into that. The administration's goal, stated as unleashing American energy, seems central.
And that's involved actively dismantling regulations that they see as, well, burdensome for fuel producers.
Which, not surprisingly, has led to lawsuits from conservation groups trying to keep those regulations in place.
Absolutely. And part of that regulatory picture, there are reports the EPA is preparing to possibly eliminate the need for polluters to report their greenhouse gas emissions.
Wow. Eliminate reporting. That seems fundamental to tracking progress, or lack thereof.
It does. How do you manage what you're not measuring, right? Then there was the proclamation giving coal plants a break.
Oh, yeah, the 2-year exemption.
Exactly. From tougher air pollution standards. The administration framed it as necessary for energy reliability and national security.
Reliability is often the argument used, isn't it? But you have to weigh that against the air quality impact.
Definitely. And it goes beyond just exemptions. Reports suggest a much wider dismantling is happening.
You mean federal offices?
Yeah. Offices overseeing clean air, drinking water, our national parks, forests, conservation efforts.
Climate-smart farming, environmental justice. It sounds like pretty broad sweep.
It really does. And if these reports are accurate, it raises big questions about the government's ability to actually oversee these areas effectively.
And tied into that are the reported mass layoffs. We're hearing about agencies like the National Weather Service, FEMA, the EPA itself, the Forest Service.
Losing experienced staff like that, I mean, the institutional knowledge is huge. It could really impact how these agencies function day to day and in emergencies.
So organizational changes, staff cuts. What about the rules themselves?
Well, reports also point to slashing regulatory standards for fossil fuels, petrochemical plants, mining, basically polluting industries potentially facing fewer hurdles.
Which could mean, well, more pollution, potentially.
That's the concern, certainly. And then there's talk about going after the nonprofits, too.
How so?
There was a rumor, at least, of a potential executive order to remove the tax-exempt status for some climate advocacy groups.
That would hit their funding hard.
It could seriously hinder their ability to operate. And alongside that, a push for a budget reconciliation bill.
To do what?
To cancel billions in grants from the previous administration. Funds meant for clean energy and environmental protection projects.
Okay, so that's a lot of action on the administration side. What's the response been like? You mentioned lawsuits earlier.
Right. That seems to be a major avenue for pushback. Challenging the legality of the layoffs, the funding suspensions, even things like removing climate change information from government websites.
Has there been much street protest like that original Earth Day?
You know, observers noted that maybe initially the large-scale street resistance seemed a bit underwhelming.
Any idea why?
Well, speculation includes maybe just the sheer scale and speed of the changes, people feeling overwhelmed, perhaps some groups trying to remain apolitical, and maybe just general protest fatigue after several intense years.
That makes sense. But is that changing?
It seems so. We saw reports of increased mobilization recently, these all-out on Earth Day actions.
What do those involve?
Environmental groups joining up with pro-democracy groups. Their message seems to be about the fundamental right to live free and healthy lives, connecting those two ideas.
Interesting link. Any specific examples?
Yeah, in New York, there was a hands-off migrants march. They explicitly linked migrant justice issues with concerns about fossil fuels, arguing both relate to displacement and hardship.
Okay, so drawing connections between different issues.
Exactly. And in Milwaukee, a Stop the Cuts march protested reductions not just in environmental and climate funding, but also healthcare, education, seeing it all as interconnected.
Right. And I saw something about a planned protest targeting James Murdoch.
Yeah, the Planet Over Profit and hashtag Tesla Takedown Coalition, they're reportedly focusing on pollution allegations against Tesla and framing the Trump-Musk relationship as a threat.
Speaking of New York, the city controller, Brad Lander, seemed pretty vocal on Earth Day.
He was. He directly condemned the rollbacks and pointed to specific impacts on the city. Well, reported cuts to climate infrastructure funding, specifically mentioning FEMA apparently canceling the BRIC program that's building resilient infrastructure and communities.
And BRIC funding was important for New York City.
Hugely important. It was earmarked for critical flood protection projects, which, for a coastal city like New York, is vital with rising sea levels.
Wow. What else did he mention?
He also highlighted the reported halt of a major offshore wind farm project that was supposed to power hundreds of thousands of homes with clean energy.
So hitting renewable energy goals, too.
And impacting related port development jobs. Plus, he mentioned layoffs at the Department of General Services impacting LIHEAP.
LIHEAP, that's the Energy Assistance Program for low-income households, right?
Exactly. Helps people afford heating and cooling, so cuts there could really hurt vulnerable New Yorkers, especially with more extreme weather.
So Lander's highlighting local impacts. Is he doing anything proactively?
Yes, he announced he's pushing the asset managers who handle the city's retirement funds harder on climate, demanding credible net zero plans, and he actually threatened to put their contracts out to bid if their plans aren't good enough, using the city's financial clout.
That's significant. And didn't he also bring up Tesla again?
He did. He reportedly renewed his call for litigation against Tesla, expressing concern that Elon Musk's focus on other ventures like DOGE could negatively impact Tesla's performance and, by extension, the city's climate goals, given their pension fund investments.
Okay, so pressure from multiple angles there.
Yeah.
Stepping back to the bigger picture, how are observers framing this overall direction?
Many are calling it a war on the planet, essentially, an attempt to undo much of the environmental progress made since that first Earth Day, potentially leading to, well, more pollution and ecological damage.
And we heard reports about the EPA administrator's plans.
Right. Pledging to dissolve the agency's scientific research office, cut staff significantly, undo numerous regulations. It's quite a list.
Which really undermines the science-based approach to policy, doesn't it?
Critically so. And of course, there was the withdrawal from the Paris Climate Accord.
A huge international step.
And efforts reported to get around the Supreme Court decision that allows the EPA to limit carbon dioxide emissions. Plus canceling clean energy incentives and, as we mentioned, that reported desire to let polluters skip emissions reporting.
It paints a picture of really trying to remove climate considerations from policy.
That seems to be the direction. We even heard about a leading climate scientist who actually moved to New Zealand because of the administration's stance.
Really? Left the country?
Yeah, and warned that other researchers might follow. He stressed how serious exiting the Paris Agreement was, saying the U.S. can't just opt out without major consequences, and that there's an ethical responsibility to lead.
What does the public think about all this? Any sense of that?
Well, one survey reportedly found that over half of Americans actually oppose this reversal on climate leadership.
Including Republicans.
Apparently, younger Republicans showed notable concern. The perception seems to be growing that these rollbacks could threaten jobs, especially in clean energy, plus public health and the environment generally, and U.S. leadership.
Okay, so potentially a gap between policy direction and public opinion there. Now, there was one more area of concern mentioned, international aid.
Yes, very concerning reports about the cancellation of USAID and its international conservation programs.
What kind of programs are we talking about?
Things like protecting endangered species, fighting poaching, illegal fishing, providing clean water and sanitation in developing countries. Really vital work.
And the impact of cutting that.
Potentially devastating for those efforts.
Yeah.
But it gets even more immediate and tragic.
How so?
There are alarming reports about cuts to emergency food aid, specifically aid for starving children in countries like Bangladesh and Somalia.
Emergency food, you mean like therapeutic food?
Exactly. Life-saving stuff like that special peanut-based. Apparently, despite some initial focus on the issue, the administration's actions have disrupted the entire delivery pipeline.
So the food isn't getting there.
Reports say shipments of this critical aid are literally stuck here in the U.S., and for children suffering severe malnutrition, delays like that. Well, the consequences can be fatal very quickly.
That's incredibly grim. It puts a very human face on these policy decisions.
It really does. It shows how decisions made in Washington can have life or death consequences thousands of miles away.
So wrapping this up, reflecting on that 55th anniversary of Earth Day yesterday, The contrast is just unavoidable, isn't it?
Stark. You had this moment that sparked major environmental protections, and now a very different direction being reported.
With serious concerns being raised about the long-term impact on, well, everything. Our environment, public health, our international standing, and as we just heard, even the most vulnerable populations globally.
It's a pivotal moment, it feels like, forcing a hard look at the kind of future these choices might lead to.
Absolutely. Which brings us to a final thought for you, our listeners. Thinking about the history, that first Earth Day, and everything we've discussed today on Meteorology Matters. What role do you see for individual action, for collective mobilization in shaping where we go from here on environmental policy?
It's definitely something worth pondering. How does change happen now?
Indeed. Keep thinking, keep engaging. And for more discussions like this, remember you can follow meteorologist Rob Jones on Instagram, that's meteorologist. On TikTok, it's TV meteorologist. And on YouTube, follow Rob Jones Hurricane. You'll also find the Meteorology Matters podcast playlist there on YouTube.